Extraterrestrials. Are they just figments of a creepy legend that speaks of human-shaped life forms having ill intentions towards us? Or is there another explanation? UFOs and those who are operating them have been reported by witnesses throughout time as small but terrifying greys having huge black eyes and standing alongside a person's bed at night while communicating through an odd form of telepathy. What is the truth behind the UFO mystery? How advanced is their technology compared to ours? Where do they come from? And why do aliens abduct us? I am your host, Maria Anna van Driel, and you are listening to The Next Truth, where science and myth meet. This week, I'm exploring the wide and mysterious world of the unexplained aerial phenomena, together with long-time MuFON board member Tom Whitmore, who has been fascinated by military and intelligence agency interactions with the UFO public. He has undertaken a research study of the history of the MJ-12 affair and intends to eventually publish his findings.
Every time I go into these topics of about aliens or advanced technologies and starting to explain that, what my vision is about, always, the connection goes boom, and it's gone for a couple of seconds. Always. I had that with Dr. Seth Shostak, I had that with Nick Pope, and I had that with film director Benjamin Redford. And now I also have it with you, that the connection is gone. So, well, it is remarkable because all the other podcasts do not have these moments. So, and these are not about advanced technologies, only when it goes about advanced technologies.
Okay.
So,
sorry
it is creepy, it is strange, and it makes you think, God, so much.
Yeah.
Tom, welcome to the show of The Next Truth, where science and myth meet. As I just shared, you are a long-time member of MuFON. What influenced you to join this all-volunteer, non-profit, charitable corporation? What is the world's oldest and largest civilian UFO investigation and research organization?
I was born in 1953, and I grew up in the 1950s and 1960s. And I'm a child of the Cold War, and I grew up seeing the kind of science fiction programs that Americans grew up with, like The Day the Earth Stood Still, and Invaders from Mars, and The Twilight Zone, and The Invaders. And like anyone, like any young person, I developed an interest in space and science. It was being pushed very heavily during my childhood. When I was 12 years old, I saw a book by Donald Kehoe about flying saucers, and he was a big UFO proponent at the time, and I started reading his books. Well, I didn't get active in the UFO field until the early 1990s. And when I got interested, I started reading the UFO literature. And in the UFO literature, I discovered that the MuFON organization was being run out of Seguin, Texas. And I was living in San Antonio, Texas at the time. And Seguin is only a few miles from San Antonio. And the director of MuFON, Walt Andrus, would attend the local meetings in San Antonio. And I was able to meet him. So in my readings, I discovered MuFON, and I decided that I wanted to get involved with the organization and that I wanted to become a field investigator. So I studied for the field investigator exam. I passed the field investigator exam. I became a field investigator and I investigated several cases. I eventually became the leader of the local group there in San Antonio. And a couple of years later, Walt Andrus invited me to be on the board of directors of MuFON. That was in 1994, 1995, and I've been on the board ever since.
You say you investigating UFO sightings in the field. Do I have to consider this as, or thinking about an image of, well, pointing your camera to the sky, searching for lights, or is this more into this idea of listening to signals from outer space that are a bit, well, out there? That is pointing out to a civilization that we have not yet encountered.
Well, it's not quite that dramatic. At the time in the early 1990s, we didn't necessarily have a direct way to get cases. In theory, well, a lot of the reports went into headquarters in Seguin, and then Walt Andrus would forward the report to the state director, and then the state director would assign the case. And sometimes that worked well, sometimes that didn't. What I did was I convinced the group to pay for an extra phone line and an answering machine, and I set up a reporting line. So I got several reports that way. And most all of the reports were not too dramatic. I had one report where some teenagers thought they were seeing UFOs, and what they were seeing were the reflections of spotlights against the cloud cover. I did have an interesting case with an individual that believed that he had been taken aboard a craft and that the so-called aliens imparted technical knowledge onto him. That was another case that I investigated. I also had a conversation with Linda Howe. This is back in the 1990s when Linda Howe was being supported in her researches by Robert Bigelow, and she was investigating animal mutilations cases. So those are just three examples of the kinds of things that I got involved in.
You just mentioned about abduction, which is a term that is well known in UFO cases, abduction. And people are have been and are reporting being abducted by Grace, for instance. Why do you think that these alien life forms are abducting people from Earth and taking them away into their ship to, I don't know where, another planet or just above the atmosphere of the Earth? Why are these aliens doing this? It's much easier to stay here in somebody's bedroom or living room and conduct their experiments here, because I also understood that these civilizations from outer space have the ability to paralyze somebody for a brief moment, or removing or reducing somebody's memory. So why not staying here, making all the efforts to abduct somebody? Why are they doing that?
The obvious answer, well, not necessarily obvious, but the prevalent answer is that they seem to be interested in our biology, in our specifically in our DNA. And many of the abduction stories recount how reproductive materials taken both from men and from women, things like ovaries and such. Now, women have reported interrupted pregnancies. They become pregnant, and then later they're re-abducted, and the fetus disappears. So on the face of it, and assuming that these abduction stories are true, that there is truth to it, the so-called aliens appear to be interested in our biology, in our reproductive capabilities, in our DNA. Now, Why don't they just do it in the bedroom? I would draw an analogy. If you go to the doctor, if you have a situation that the doctor needs to concentrate on, he or she will want to put you in the hospital where they can control the conditions that they're studying your condition. So I think it's similar with these so-called aliens. They want the person aboard the craft so that they can remove sperm or ova or whatever it is that they're interested in. Now, there have been many reports of so-called implants put into people, and we don't know exactly for sure what these are for, but we've speculated, and it seems common sense that they're used for some kind of tracking facility.
Like GPS.
To keep track of the person.
I find that a bit, well, I'm sorry for playing the devil's advocate, but I like to ask the question, what if they are just in our layers of atmosphere and have the ability to view us for instance, night vision and using lasers, why putting creepy stuff inside somebody? You can see somebody.
Well, I mean, we tend to try to analyze this from our point of view, from our mentality. And assuming this is really occurring, I think it's important to try to understand that these aliens are doing what they're doing for their purposes. They're not doing it for our purposes. And they're doing it from their point of view on the basis of whatever their agenda or agendas are.
You mentioned that alien civilizations, or at least the ones that we have become known with, are specifically interested in our biology and how that we reproduce ourselves. Does that mean that these, well, creatures, so to say, do not have this ability themselves?
Well, there has been speculation about that, and there are different ideas about where these so-called aliens are coming from, and there's more than one type. There are several groups that are operating in the Earth environment, whether they're extraterrestrial or interdimensional or ultra-terrestrial or time travelers. We just don't know the answer to that. But one speculation is that they are unable to reproduce on their own, and they need some fresh material to work with, some fresh DNA. That's one speculation. Another speculation is that many abductees, particularly females, have noticed these hybrids on board these craft. And there have even been reports of some women being given the hybrid to hold, just like a mother would bond with her child. And these hybrids are thinner, they're more spindly, they have wispy hair, they're very strange looking and very odd. So there's some speculation that, these hybrids are being developed for some purpose or another, even to the point of honing the hybrid product to the point to where they're almost indistinguishable from you and I on the street. And that's kind of getting into a science fiction scenario there, but these are speculations that have gone on, and the bottom line is we just don't know what the answer is to that.
You being, if I may say so, or may call it like that, a field agent or working with MuFON, how do you prove that these claims, what abductees say that they have experienced, how do you prove that is legit, what they are saying?
Well, it depends on the person's attitude, because we've always had a problem in getting the mainstream scientific community to get seriously involved in UFO studies. And because they don't get involved, not as much science gets done that needs to get done. And because we're not being able to do as much hard, firm science as we like, as really needs to be, then because of that, scientists won't get involved. So it's kind of a conundrum. It's a vicious circle. And I think that in terms of proof, we don't have physical, scientific, hard proof. But we, depending on how you look at it, we do have a preponderance of the evidence. That's a kind of a legal idea that's used in civil litigation in the United States, where you have a preponderance of the evidence, and even though you may not have firm proof, you have enough to convince a reasonable person that something's going on. And
so it's not like in the X-Files, for instance, that Scully and Mulder find something, a chip or something, or I don't know, something hard proof evidence that these people have been abducted or have been in any form in contact with alien civilization. It's not like the X-Files, the movies.
There has been some recovery of so-called implants. There have been several instances of that, and they were surgical operations conducted by an individual by the name of Dr. Roger Lear. And the findings there are inconclusive. Now, what's missing is you don't have the scientific rigor of one investigator having a finding and then that finding being passed on to a peer review or other qualified people that can evaluate the evidence and then write it up and then have it scrutinized by the scientific community. That's what's not happening. And not only in the physical realm, but in the psychiatric realm, if psychiatrists would get involved and seriously study abductees and experiencers and gather data and develop data, then they can develop hypotheses, to possibly explain what's going on with these abductees. That can be peer reviewed and it can be scrutinized by the psychiatric community. That would be some progress, but that's not happening.
Is there a form with points that a psychiatrist is adding up? This point is a no. This point is a yes. And if you have enough yeses, then you are abductee according to the psychiatrist. Or is there a particular behavior? How does somebody know that they have been abducted? If, for instance, memory is being wiped out from the mind.
Yes, there are questionnaires. MuFON has, we have the experiencer research team, and they have questionnaire. There's also another organization that has operates by the acronym of FREE, F-R-E-E, and that was involved with Dr. Edgar Mitchell and other very qualified scientists that have collected a lot of data about this. So I think to be scientific, an abductee needs to be evaluated both by a qualified psychologist and a qualified psychiatrist. So these qualified people can sort out those that are maybe imagining things or that have other psychological problems or maybe a psychiatric condition, and we'll, set them aside. And then you have the ones that are telling these stories that don't have any psychological or psychiatric issues underlying that. Okay. And I think that would help.
You mentioned in the beginning that you have written a couple of books about UFOs, and that is how you ended up with MuFON. But except for reading these books, investigating in the field, did you had your own experience in UFO sightings or a close encounter, if I may call it like that?
Well, for the record, based on your recent question, I have not written any books, but I have read books.
I meant read. I'm not written. Okay.
No, and the answer is no, I have not had a sighting or an experience. And I kind of tell a joke that if you don't want to see a UFO, you should hang around with me.
I think that, like many people in the world, I have seen a couple of odd things in the sky as well. Well, I believe altogether 4 times. I cannot say that they were UFOs, but they were odd indeed. But for instance, I had a crazy experience. I'm not putting it into the bowl of alien civilizations or UFOs and etc. But it is odd indeed. So I was laying on the couch in the evening and I dozed off a little bit, and my husband was sitting 2 meters from me, and suddenly I saw a crazy, odd, strange creature looking like human but not quite. In my feeling, it was not human. It was in a complete yellowish light. It was emitting this light. And I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight. But somehow, in my mind, it felt like a synthetic narcosis. And I couldn't fight that. I fell asleep. It was boop, and I was gone. And I woke up in my bed. How the heck did I get from the couch to my bed? I do not recall anything between that. So if I tell you a story like that, would you, as, may I say, UFO expert, field agent from MuFON, consider this as, a visiting from an alien civilization, or perhaps a moment of being abducted?
Well, I would definitely recommend that you attempt to make a report. I can
I was almost being afraid that you were going to say, I'm going to advise you to see a psychiatrist. I'm so sorry. No, okay. Okay, no, please go on.
Well, I'll be glad to refer you to our experiencer research team so that you can file a report. And we'll want to file that through the MuFON regular database as well. But I think what you're describing qualifies as something that deserves further inquiry and investigation. Now, whether you saw an extraterrestrial,
I have no traumas from that or anything like that. It is just an experience that you have, that I had, that a one-time thing, and well, that was it. But okay, please go on. What happens if, let's say, I report this, and then what will be the process that is going? What I'm studying?
Well, we would file the report through the state organization, and the case will be logged into the MuFON case management system, and then you'll be referred to the experiencer research team, and the experiencer research team will follow up with you and will probably send you a questionnaire. And then that's the initial process to get the process started.
So there is a lot of going on after that.
There should be follow-up. It really depends on the case, because sometimes an individual will be or think that they're an abductee, and they are abducted more than once. I mean, they've had a series of these events. So and maybe it may be still continuing after they file the first report. So sometimes, the case follow-up goes on for quite a while this is going on. In your case, if it's kind of a one-off, one event, then there may or may not be a lot of further follow-up depending on how you answer the questionnaire and what information you're actually providing.
Well, that is highly interesting. How do people get in contact? Do they contact you personally, or do they go via the website of MuFON?
They can go to the website MuFON, and we have a caption there on our website for you to report.
And you sent me your biography in front, and you just also mentioned that in the beginning that you have a daughter. How does she think about this all? Because that is, to say, chasing UFOs and aliens. How is she thinking about this?
I don't know what she tells her friends. Probably her crazy dad, you know.
Oh,
With me, I mean, she's courteous. I occasionally ask for her help. For example, I just wrote a paper that I published on my blog, and I've asked her to read it and give me her feedback. I've written other things like a chapter, an introductory chapter that I've asked her to read and give me her feedback on. But she does not lay awake at night waiting for the next opportunity to study UFOs with me. In other words, she's not. She's a millennial, and she's very, very good with computers. I published this paper on my blog, and
yes.
I also wanted to post an audio version of my paper on YouTube, and she helped me do that. I don't think I would have been able to do it on my own.
So super cool support from the daughter.
Yes, yeah, and she has skills, and she has skills and abilities I don't have.
And in return, you play your guitar music for her, or because you are also a high-skilled guitarist.
I am a guitarist. I've been playing guitar since I was 14. I compose on the classical guitar. My style, I refer to my style as kind of a pseudo-classical style. It has elements of folk guitar, elements of what I call contemporary, and some classical sounding elements. I've composed over 10 original pieces. It amounts to about 40 minutes of original music that I intend to have recorded professionally, and then I'll have that posted once I get that done. And I'm not trying to make money. It's just for the record. I call it my musical legacy.
Cool. I have to think about particular movies. I forgot the titles, in where I believe it was Close Encounter, or was it the
third kind
that they the third kind, that they were addressing alien civilization from that UFO on that mountain with sound and light, etc. I had to think about it. What is the real number of the legit unidentified aircrafts which have an origin other than Earth and are researched by MuFON?
Well, generally speaking, each month MuFON receives between 500 and 2,000 reports.
Wow.
Now, we have to remember that the modern UFO era has been going on since 1947, and there have been literally hundreds of thousands of reports made since then, and that doesn't even include other sightings that people have had that have not reported. But MuFON does receive many hundreds of reports. Now, historically, generally speaking, about 90 to 95% of those reports are explainable. Okay, they're identifiable. People often misidentify natural phenomena. They'll see the planet Venus, or they'll see an airplane or a helicopter. Recently, we've gotten a lot of reports because of the Starlink satellites that have been put up into space.
Yes.
I think Elon Musk project.
I watched that. I saw, I was with my kids and my husband at a bonfire, and we saw those lights in a straight line coming over, and we were looking like, what the bleep is that? and we didn't know, and my oldest daughter was going, yeah, but don't be such a crazy chicken. No, it's just an airplane. What? Airplanes? How many are there? More than 60. No, this is not an airplane. Well, so okay, but later on, yes, I understood that Elon Musk had about between 60 and 80 satellites shot into in their orbit. Yeah, but please go on.
Now, the really good cases are pretty rare. It's MuFON's task to help the public in their efforts to try to identify things that they have seen and that they don't understand. And so we take the report, we log the report, we investigate, we interview the witness, if there's any physical evidence, which actually is quite rare, we collect that and analyze it. And then we draw a conclusion what in the investigator's opinion the object was. And if it is something that's really truly anomalous, then it goes into the unknown category. Now, we can't say definitively that this phenomena originates outside the Earth. There have been theories for many years that it may be something on Earth. The common sense inclination is to think that they're extraterrestrial in origin. But the bottom line is we don't have proof of that. And we can't honestly say that we truly know that they're extraterrestrial in origin.
And with extraterrestrial, you mean from outer space?
Yes.
But it could be that they are from Earth, but that it is a forgotten evolution, or that we humans are a side branch from a real evolution. We are, well, junk DNA, to say so, or a mistake from nature, or bred by these creatures.
There are a lot of different ideas. There are all kinds of interesting theories. You know, the ancient astronauts, and one possibility is that, yes, they're extraterrestrial in origin, but they've had bases here for a long time, maybe inside mountains or beneath the sea or something. And, they've maybe been living here for a long time, but maybe they were extraterrestrial in origin to begin with.
I suddenly have to think about the theory of hollow Earth. Something that in World War II, Hitler and his companions were also searching for an entrance in that. I believe there are still people looking for an entrance on the Arctic, I believe. So I was thinking, hollow Earth. Let's go into the science behind such a theory. Dyson Spheres. Do you think that it's possible that the core of the Earth is the energy source of a Dyson sphere built by, as you call them, Asian astronauts, and that the Earth's surface is the outer sphere of a Dyson sphere?
Well, I have to think that the conventional science is probably correct that the Earth has a molten core. But I do think that it's possible there may be areas within the Earth that are cavernous that we don't know about. Now, I'm not saying there are. I'm just saying I think it's possible. In other words, there are fairly large areas inside the Earth that are maybe habitable. Maybe they're hollow. Maybe there are places like that. I know there's one cave. I think it's in Mexico. They haven't found the end of it yet. So, who knows what's down there.
Is that the same cave? I read an article about a cave with enormous crystals. It's a while ago. Is that probably the same cave? I forgot where it was.
I don't know, but there are some cool caves in Mexico for sure. And probably, many other places too.
So they haven't found the end of it. Could that be like Jules Verne also was writing about inner Earth with, he stated with dinosaurs and their own evolution and ecosystems, etc. Do you think there's something possible like that? That there are yet unexplored civilizations living there, having their own evolution, and that is probably maybe the strange creatures we are seeing in, for instance, if I pronounce it correctly, the Chupacabra.
Chupacabra, yeah.
Okay, it was.
You can be forgiven.
Yeah, okay. I am so glad.
You speak English better than I could ever speak Dutch or German.
Okay, well, I'm happy for that. That is comforting. um, Grabbing back to the UFOs, how do you, um, well, what do you need? What information do you need to say this is a UFO, unexplained, and this is a, well, sort of UFO, but in the explainable area?
It depends on the case. And I can say, generally speaking, that the closer the witness is to the object, the more likely it is that it could be anomalous. And also, if you have more than one witness, if you have, two or three or more witnesses that corroborate the encounter, hopefully they're separate. They're people that don't know each other, and if they're telling the same, if they're relating the same similar information, that strengthens the case. Now, you talked about close encounters of the third kind, but a close encounter of the third kind is an encounter where the witness is close enough to the object that they know that it is something very, very unusual. So it really depends on the case. Now, the encounter, hopefully they're separate. They're people that don't know each other, and if they're telling the same, if they're relating the same similar information, that strengthens the case. Now, you talked about close encounters of the third kind, but a close encounter of the third kind is an encounter where the witness is close enough to the object that they know that it is something very, very unusual. So it really depends on the case. Now, I think ethically, you can't say that it's extraterrestrial in origin, but you can eliminate all other explanations ethically and come to the conclusion that it is an unknown, that it's an anomalous. It's an anomalous event.
But there is not, well, that you say, okay, it has to be this size, or it has to be that color, or it has to have that kind of sound or frequency or speed, or that is not how you conduct your investigation.
Well, UFOs are like people. They come in all shapes and sizes.
Okay.
UFOs have been reported in just about every shape that you can think of. Circular, round, lenticular, saucer-shaped, cube, rectangle, flying wing, you name it. And so we can't say, well, that wasn't a saucer-shaped object, so therefore you didn't say a UFO. And that's one of the bewildering problems in UFO studies is the variety of shapes and sizes and associated activities with the object, the sound, the color, maybe the smell, the vibration. There's just a whole wide variety of things that go on.
A complete topic switch. Have you ever been in Roswell?
I've been to Roswell, New Mexico, and I actually drove to a remote location where a lady that said that at the time of the Roswell incident, she was a young girl living out in the country, and she saw a fireball go across pretty close to the ground. That I thought that was very interesting. But I've been to that part of the world. Now, the exact location of the crash is something that's possibly even still classified to this day. So I think it's difficult to go to where people think that the object or objects crashed. But I've been all over New Mexico. I've been to northeast, northwest, central, southeast, southwest, But to answer your question, yes, I've been to Roswell, New Mexico.
So you cannot say what really happened at Roswell.
We can't prove it. Now,
but you have an idea.
Well, there are different theories and different explanations.
Hmm.
The original investigators, William Moore and Stanton Friedman, they did the initial interviews with the witnesses in the late 1970s, and they were led to believe that the object was extraterrestrial. Since then, there have been other explanations. For example, even the Air Force came out in the 90s with a report. This report is it's as thick as a phone book, but their explanation was that it was a recovered mogul balloon, which was a balloon that was designed to take radiation measurements at the time. There has been one explanation that some kind of planform vehicle was created for high altitude testing, and that people were put in this vehicle and it was carried in a balloon, and the balloon exploded and the vehicle crashed. There's that explanation. And then there's the UFO explanation that actually two saucers crashed, one near Corona, New Mexico, the other one in southwest New Mexico, and that bodies were recovered and that even one live alien was recovered. So, these are stories that have been told, but as UFO people like me and investigators, we don't have proof of anything. We don't have proof of it.
It's hard to find proof that is, well, proving that they are real. I'm listening to you, and New Mexico and the desert-like scenes that we know all about very well. The Grand Canyon is one of the largest tunnel system that is in that area, and crossing from almost from one side of the USA to the other side of the USA. Now, I have been thinking about this for quite a while. If military organizations have advanced aircrafts that have the ability of blending in the background, bending the light, NASA's PPT engines, the pool, etc., etc. Most people are not quite familiar with this kind of technology. So what if Area 51 is only a decoy, so to say, and S4 is all a decoy, or, well, letting people looking into a different direction, literally, and that the whole Grand Canyon is one enormous dump. The base is underground. Do you think that it is a possibility that, well, these kind of tunnel systems can be used as, well, minks, for instance?
Well, there have been stories and rumors about underground tunnels and underground bases and maglev systems, where they go from one base to another underground. And I even have documentation in my files of the government beginning to research building underground facilities right after World War II. And they learned something from the Germans, because the United States and Britain bombed Germany so heavily that the Germans had to go underground to manufacture their missiles and other military equipment. And I think when the U.S. got over there after the war, they realized how much of this was going on, and they started thinking, what if we get into a nuclear war? We may have to fight this underground. So they legitimately started building certain military facilities underground. And also there's an alternate government site that is underground, for the Congress and the president and all of that. The government can continue to operate mainly in the case of nuclear war. Now, at the same time, we want to remember that the technology is there to create these tunnels. For example, there's a tunnel that goes between France and Britain that goes underneath the English Channel. There are tunnels here in Washington, D.C., that go underneath the Potomac and in San Francisco. They do that in New York. They do that in San Francisco. So the technology to build these tunnels is there. The question is, and some research has been done by one investigator about underground facilities, but I don't think we really know how many there really are and how, what activities occur in some of these possible underground locations.
Our technology, we have become familiar with. I spoke to UFO expert Nick Pope, and that was in September this year, about 2 months ago. And I asked him the question, a similar question about reversed engineering, the advanced technology or alien technology, reversing it. And now I have a microwave in my kitchen coming from this kind of reversed engineering. Are you from the same idea that, like Nick Pope said, I quote him, "I am quite skeptical about that. I think that you would need to look at history of science or scientific understanding and technology programs." And he goes on in the interview, "I mean, no piece of technology suddenly springs into existence." Are you of the same opinion that there is no way that there is reverse technology?
Well, I'll say this, Maria. If there have been one or more UFOs recovered, they almost certainly have tried to figure out how they work. Mm-hmm. Now, whether they can figure it out or not, that's a different question. And we hear different things that they have one or more saucers and they've made very little progress. And then at the other end, you hear stories that they've made tremendous progress. They have anti-gravity now. And some of the things we're seeing is because, they've developed this technology. Mm-hmm. Then there was Philip Corso that claimed that some of the Roswell technology was secreted into U.S. corporations, and things like optical fibers, and microcircuits and things like this were developed from that. And I don't, again, these are stories and we don't have any proof of it. There's the development of the transistor, as far as I know, is well documented. And I do have a book about Bell Labs, which I've read, and they explain that in their scientific work developing technology, they keep notebooks. And these notebooks are kept rigorously. So there's a documentary trail, there's a paper trail of every advance that they're making with this technology. And it's hard to argue that transistors
Are you referring to
from the
Are you referring to Project Paperclip?
No. Now that's a subject. I mean, as you know, at the end of World War II, both the Russians and scientists were trying to get their hands on every German scientist that they could. Mm-hmm. And the Germans were very advanced in certain respects. So that's a whole nother subject.
Well, I was discussing this idea also around Project Paperclip and the scientists from World War II with my husband the other night. And I had to think about, they went to Norway, that facility with all the nuclear stuff. And then they came back with D2O, or in simple terms, that is heavy water. And then they ended up in Poland, where we all know Hitler's bell, or Die Glocke. And I was thinking, well, what best to transport in D2O in heavy water is neutrinos, and neutrinos combining that with, the fiberglass idea, the light, etc. You get time travel, and you can, in a nutshell then, and you can build, a source for a Dyson sphere and etc. Okay, but that's correct. That's a completely different story. So, it's just popped up in my mind.
I think the Germans the Germans were very, very good, but I don't know if they were that good.
I don't know. Well, I spoke with a couple of German scientists, and some did, well, say so, blow my mind. Some, as I have mentioned in your intro, you have undertaken a research study for the history of MJ12 affair. It is a long time ago that I have read something about MJ12. So please fill me in. What is this affair, and what was it again? All the mysteries about and around MJ12.
Well, the idea of MJ12 or Majestic 12 was, and this is the idea, the legend, that the UFO or UFOs were recovered from Roswell, and because of that, it was a big deal. And President Truman appointed a committee of 12 people to, one, study the recovered materials and the bodies and possibly a live alien, and two, to track the UFO phenomenon, and three, to manage the public perception about it. Now, that's the legend. What actually happened was, in the 1980s, certain researchers came across certain documents, and there was some manipulation going on, possibly from the Air Force and possibly from intelligence agencies, because they may have been running a counterintelligence program. But there were several UFO researchers that were exposed to certain documents that purported to refer to MJ12. And the main one, the most famous one, is referred to as the Eisenhower briefing document. And that was purportedly a document that was created for President-elect Eisenhower. And he was given that in the late fall, either November or December of 1952, before he took office in 1953. And it explained the Roswell crash and that bodies were recovered and that the MJ12 committee was formed. It listed the members of the MJ12 committee, and that the work on this was ongoing. Now, a certain UFO researcher by the name of William Moore, who was a well-known researcher at the time in the mid to late 1980s, he received this document through his associate, Jamie Chandra. And this document, it was actually a roll of film, 35 millimeter film, which included the Eisenhower briefing document and the so-called Truman-Forrestal Memorandum, which was President Truman's authorization to create this committee. They received this in I believe 1984, and they sat on it for 2.5 years. And then another UFO researcher in Britain by the name of Timothy Good received a copy, and he decided to include it in his upcoming book, Above Top Secret, The Worldwide UFO Cover-Up, and that was in 1987. So in 1987, these documents came into the public domain, and it created a big sensation. There was an FBI investigation. They tried to learn where the documents came from, and was there really an MJ12 committee? There was even a feature on a popular news show, ABC Nightline, about it. And it caused quite a stir. Now, here's the interesting thing. That wasn't the end of the MJ12 affair as I see it. In the 1990s, more documents came out through another individual by the name of Timothy Cooper. He received quite a large number of documents that were either directly or indirectly related to MJ12. A copy of a so-called manual, Psalm 1-01 manual, came into the public domain in the 1990s. And then we've had other incidents as well. For example, the Serpo story came out after the year 2000. And even as late as 2017, another document purporting to be from MJ12 came out on the internet. Now, I'm not saying these documents are authentic. In fact, almost all of the documents are questioned, and some of the documents are, have many problems with them. So there's a lot of skepticism about the authenticity of the documents. But for some reason, someone or some organization or some group is continuing to feed these documents into the public about this whole MJ12 idea and this MJ12 legend.
So to keep the mystery up or the legend up, or to let people look into another direction as into the mystery instead of in the real science behind UFO. What is the real science behind aliens and UFOs?
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe to divert attention. It may have something to do with tracking foreign spies. You put some information out into the public and see, who gives what to whom. There are some different possibilities. The UFO believers want to think that this group is preparing the public to accept the reality, the UFO reality. It's a big step for humankind to understand that, and that they're gradually being prepared, to accept this. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's one theory.
To accept the truth, to accept that grays are having big black eyes and can communicate via telepathy, or to accept what? What is the truth behind it?
If we're being visited by several alien groups,
yes,
and if they are abducting people,
yes,
and maybe doing some other things, and if they, you mentioned the gray aliens, there have been human-like aliens reported, the so-called Nordics. There have been reptilian kinds of aliens reported. There have been insect-like aliens that look like a praying mantis. If there's a big difference between thinking, oh, maybe there's life on other planets. There's a big difference between that and really having to understand, having the proof put in front of you publicly by an authority that's trusted, that it really is true. That's a big deal. That's a huge adjustment for society.
There will be a shock.
Yes, a big shock.
And people go into a panic mode.
Well, I mean, think of this. Are people going to go, okay, now, am I going to get abducted too? I could see how people could easily panic if the reality is confronted to them that it really is true.
Well, I can understand the panic. If you hear the stories of those people who have been abducted or have had a sighting that they cannot explain, and having burn marks or time lost and etc., it seems that they are pretty hostile. So I can understand the panic.
Yes.
It's a bad advertising, I guess. Bad advertising from outer space. Tom, as we are also talking to young people, and I think that many would like to know if it is possible at all. But how can you become a UFO specialist? I mean, somebody have to attend a university and getting a degree in engineering or in physics, or perhaps both?
Well, unfortunately, there is no accredited college program of UFO studies. You can't get a bachelor's degree in UFO studies or a master's or a PhD. The way that young people can get involved is start buying some good. I recommend that they buy good UFO books, and there's the internet, but I think it's better for education to read books than to just go and read, look on the internet, because there's a lot of junk out there and you don't know what you can rely on and what you cannot rely on. If you go to certain UFO sources, written sources, they'll have bibliographies of good, reliable UFO books to read. And it's maybe beyond the scope of this discussion here for me to list all those, but I can certainly help you if you want to, provide a bibliography that I think are good, solid, reliable books that young people can read to get interested in the UFO field, and it can point them in the right direction.
Okay, cool. Or they can join MuFON, because I have read on the website that you can join.
Yes.
You can
Yes, they can.
a member.
And you can, we have an online course to train field investigators. We have an excellent field investigator manual, and then we have field investigator exam. So young people that want to get into the UFO field can go in that direction. And I'd just like to say this too, Maria. In the UFO field, just about any kind of scientific discipline applies. Whether it's physics or math or meteorology or chemistry or biology, just about anything you can think of you can apply to the UFO field.
Oh, cool. I love physics and engineering. So I can apply that. The universe is indeed not fully explored, and even a scary place when you think about that we are not completely alone. From your point of view, are we alone in the universe or not?
Absolutely not. I mean, I think they've said there are either more stars or more galaxies than there are grains of sand on the beaches and the ocean. So for us to be the only intelligent life in the universe, we'd have to be living in the most statistically weird universe imaginable. So just by the numbers, even if you took an infinitesimal percentage of stars that would have intelligent life in their solar system, you'd still end up with a very, very large number.
I wonder when we are truly going to encounter them and learn probably from them, because I truly hope that they are scientists and teachers and not a creepy creature that is going to eat me alive and not bothering swallowing. Okay. Tom, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to talk with you. This is very, very interesting, and there are many, many questions within this field of research and this topic. But I see that the hour is almost over. But before we can close out, where can we find the latest details on UFO sightings? How for people to contact MuFON, and perhaps if they have questions for you personally, how they can contact you?
Well, I suggest that people go to the MuFON website. That's MuFON.com, MuFON.com, and it can get you pointed in a direction to learn more. I have a blog. That's tomwhitmoreblog.wordpress.com. That's tomwhitmoreblog.wordpress.com. My email is twhitmore87@gmail.com. And I'm on Facebook as Tom Whitmore, and I'm on Twitter as @TomTulsa. So there are a number of ways you can reach me if you want to.
Thank you all for tuning in this week on The Next Truth, where science and myth meet. Make sure to visit our website, www.nexttruth.com. That is nexttruth, all in one word.com. And let us know what you think about our podcast. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we would appreciate a rating on our website in the section The Next Truth Podcasts. Or if you would simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us too. I am Maria Anna van Driel with The Next Truth. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.